Good morning. I think we're going to start. My name is Andrzej Bobiński. I work for a think tank called Polityka Insight, and I'm very happy to welcome you at this panel, which is entitled "The Central European Economy: Continued Progress or a Region at Risk." We have a very distinguished panel, which I'll be introducing whilst asking questions. But I just wanted to say that my problem with talking about a region, when you look at a region from the inside, is that it's very diverse. It's very diverse because you have very different countries that have very different economies. Whereas when you look at a region from the outside, then it all comes together and it all makes sense. So my idea was to ask Matthias Schäfer of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung to give us this outside view of the region and to tell us in a couple of short words about what, from the outside, Central Europe looks like from an economic perspective.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation. Coming back to your question of diversity, I mean, actually, coming from Germany, there are 16 states, so there is as well experience with diversity in Germany. You cannot compare Berlin to Bavaria, for example, but in a way we have to work together. On the other hand, one narrative of the European Union always has been to be unified in diversity. So, I mean, actually, when we are diverse, this is something which is in our genome, if you want to. If I have a look, a very simple look to what I observe in these regions or all these member states that came to the European Union 10 years ago, I would underline some, from my point of view, very interesting and optimistic things and criteria. First of all, I think that Central Europe is standing for a highly skilled labor force and a labor force which is in a way productive, but for lower labor cost that concerning productivity. This is a real a competitive advantage which, for example, as well, German economy and German corporate sector definitely profited from until nowadays, as it helped actually to create plans and investment here in the regions to manage as well the supply chain and the economic activity of German companies. One footnote to that: the access of these Central European countries for us in Germany was in a way interesting because more than we had, you always tended to have a female workforce in your labor markets. This is something we enjoy nowadays much more because we as well, with the demographic change, for example, in Germany, see that how deeply we depend on females getting to the labor market, and thereby there are some ideas we could learn as well from your economies. Next point, not only the labor market, but I would underline the openness of your economies to the world. I was very impressed yesterday when we had these two politicians from the US, both Senator Murphy and Congressman Murphy, saying that they have these Polish roots. That shows up that actually how deeply these economies and your countries are interconnected already before the fall of the Iron Curtain into the world economy. And this, from my point of view, paid out in a highly productive and dynamic development of exports, of integration of your economies within the global economy. So from that point of view, you have a high and a huge openness in your economy. From a German point of view, when I compare, for example, to our neighbors in France, there is a much more being awareness of reducing borders and having open-minded economies and people and societies helps to create wealth and growth and jobs in a global world. Third point, after labor market and openness of the economy and the people and dynamics, I would as well underline or strengthen the structure of the economies, which from my point of view is likely comparable to what we can see in the so-called continental European economic models. like Germany, like Austria, like Benelux countries, Netherlands, there is still a strong influence of the manufacturing sector here in these countries and in these regions. There is a comparable situation of the services sector here in these countries. So I mean, actually, this is from my point of view, is fitting quite well to, in a way, this continental European model. Fourth point, where we can see from abroad a really a very, very attractive development in an indicator which is which outlines the knowledge-based idea of your economies. Research and development gain really an upswing in the last decade. I just wanted to quote these two numbers. In 2004, R&D in your countries was around about 21% compared to EU 15 average. Now we speak about 35%. So you can see that actually research and development and the knowledge-based driving forces of your economies can be underlined from my point of view coming from abroad. And last point I would like to mention, which has not so much to do with concrete macroeconomic indicators, but as well I would say that we should outline the capacity of your economies and your people and your society in dealing with, in a way, manageable capitalism. So, I mean, you got rid of most of all these socialistic illusions that we still have in old Europe in some contexts. So, I mean, this idea of having your economies run by workable market economies, by liberal approaches, and the idea of the importance of sound public finance, in a way, is as well something, from my point of view, which is a criteria to the countries in Central Europe concerning their economic strengths.
Okay, thank you, Matthias. Somebody told me that the lowest common denominator of our economies is that you find the fruits of our labor in a German car. Basically, in every German car you're going to find. Or you were talking about high productivity, highly skilled workforce, etc. Moving on to Professor Fiedor from the Wrocław University of Economics, could you please tell us about, because another common denominator is a successful transformation. How did we get to where we are, and what are the factors that influenced this transformation?
Thank you. Let me start with saying good afternoon, because it's 3 minutes after the noon already. So, to answer this question as an economist and additionally as the university professor, I would like to start with a definition. What is, from the economic perspective, the transformation process all about? Because there are many possible answers to this question, and my answer is very much based on the approach of new institutional economics, and it is as follows: that in the very general approach, transition from the command and control, I don't like to say planned economy, towards a market economy is first of all politically and economically determined institutional change, and it mostly consists in the gradual transformation of the system, being characterized by predomination of rent-seeking microeconomic behavior towards a system within which efficiency-driven activities of human beings and social groups prevail. Thirdly, owing to this gradual change, the transition from socialist C&C, command and control economy, towards a market economy results in a substantial decrease in transaction costs. The definition which I'm proposing here enable us to directly identify main sources of the increase in general economic efficiency being observed in a vast majority, but not in all of those countries across the region. So countries which embarked upon the transition path. Since, however, the transition is an institutional change, this increase predominantly depends on the pace at which institutions, both formal and informal, change over time. And as we perfectly know also from historical evidences and experiences, formal institutions which are law, public regulations and property rights may be changed or modified in a very short time period, but this is not the case of informal institutions. Moral values, socially accepted behavior patterns, including also the economic ones, trust and empathy, custom and habits, or moral or mental models. These are just the factors which are frequently ignored or underestimated in the public debate, which hamper the growth of general economic efficiency in transitional economies, and which make them differ very much from this perspective. For instance, a relatively broad scope of private property in the Polish socialist CNC economy, along with political power and strong social influence of the Polish Catholic Church, which made it possible that the ethos and the values characteristic for the economic culture of capitalist market economy did not disappear entirely in Poland, and which contributed, in my opinion, to a quicker, as compared to other CE countries or socialist economies, to a successful transition towards market economy. And against this a bit theoretical background, which I consider very important to prevent us from populist, superficial and wishful thinking way at looking at the transition process at itself and its overall evaluation, I would like to identify some more specific reasons of four factors of the success of transformation process. But please remember, speaking of this success, I firmly represent a view that this process is far from being completed, as for example for Poland a few years ago the World Bank has announced. At least from the point of view of informal institutions, because their change is by definition an intergenerational phenomenon. And on the other hand, those institutions are fundamental to the maturity of the whole economic system from the microeconomic point of view. Generally, I am even inclined to say or to state that, and this is not only the case of Poland for sure, one may speak of the discrepancy or the lack of equilibrium between the macroeconomic and microeconomic maturity of the transformation process, with the latter, of course, being much smaller or lagging behind. And against this background, I would like to present those more specific factors of the successful transformation, but I haven't been given enough time to do it. So let me only list them, okay? Which will take me 1 minute only. Okay. So, establishing and consecutive implementation and enforcement of strong and effective democratic legal regime and the rule of law. This is most fundamental factor. Factor one. Without this factor, any success couldn't be possible. Factor two, choice of a proper transformation model and its effective and persistent implementation. Choice of a proper transformation model, because we know that there have been adopted quite different transformation models, including Madlin's route, the case of Russia, gradual approach, the case of Bulgaria, Romania, or looking for the so-called third way, which does not exist, or the case of Poland or Hungary, capitalist revolution, which turned out to be most effective approach. And the factor number three, quick privatization program, allowing for different privatization paths and methods, and also constructed or elaborated this way to prevent us from some pathological consequences of privatization, the case of Russia or Ukraine, which is also very important from the political point of view, because a good privatization program allowing also for the so-called grounding privatization or founding privatization is a very important foundation for the emergence of a strong middle class in any economy. and then establishing of sound macroeconomic regime and market-conform public regulation schemes. Sound macroeconomic regime includes such policies like fiscal policy, budgetary policy, trade policy, and and trade policy. I said already, and at the very end, effective structural, both sectoral and horizontal policies to foster science, innovation, and education in order to increase countries' international competitiveness, as well as to prevent from some negative social outcomes of economic and institutional reforms, in order to ensure more economic and social and spatial cohesion. And frankly, this is the factor, as for this factor, in many countries, including to some extent also our country, we failed really. So we didn't use some instruments which connected with those policies, which could both foster the economic potential and the economic development of the country, and also to prevent us from some socially undesirable social costs of growth and development under conditions of radically altered institutional circumstances. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for a very concise and interesting presentation. Zoltán Pogátsa from the Western University. Quick question to you, what didn't work? Because we have a very positive view after these two presentations. Could you tell us, looking at where we are today, what did we fail to do and what basically isn't working?
Okay, so what's very interesting is you started the discussion by saying that we are very diverse in this region and there's more that differentiates us than connects us, and I tend to agree with Matthias when he says we are actually quite homogeneous. I think we're quite homogeneous because we chose a kind of transition 25 years ago which is highly dependent on foreign direct investment. And if you look at the big scheme of things in the global kind of perspective, you'll see that there isn't only a first and a second world, first and a second option vis-a-vis which the third option would lead to the third world, but there's actually a fifth, a sixth, a seventh, an eighth, and a 10th way as well. The difference between German capitalism and US capitalism is enormous. The difference between Scandinavian capitalism and Italian capitalism is enormous. The difference between Moroccan capitalism and Japanese capitalism or South Korean capitalism is enormous. So actually, within different forms of capitalism, we have huge divergences. So to sort of think of it as one capitalism vis-a-vis the Soviet system is, I think, a thinking that goes back to the times of the Cold War. We're way past the Cold War, and it's time to kind of refine our thinking and look more closely at the models of capitalism that we have. And if you do that, you realize that the Central Eastern European model of capitalism is a new form of capitalism which has not existed before, because nobody has ever tried to modernize their economies or kind of return to capitalism after 50 years of or 70 years, a case of Soviet Union, of command and control economy, to go back to a capitalist model. No one has tried that with relying so much on foreign direct investment. What connects us, even Poland, although Poland has a larger domestic sector than the rest of us, but in spite of that, the most dynamic part of the Polish economy is still the foreign direct investment based part. But definitely for the Czech Republic, Slovakia and Hungary, that is the dominant part. And it's primarily German, Austrian, Italian, British, Dutch investment which comes to the region. So that connects us. Now, where I disagree with this success story is where Deputy Prime Minister Bieńkowska yesterday was talking about how Poland is now aiming for a second level. And she said Poland is not quite there yet, but it has this vision of reaching the second level. And I think that was very, very important, very interesting, because the first level was simply creating a market economy. Now, a lot of countries tried privatizing to the inside. You all remember Václav Klaus, Vladimir Mečiar, Franjo Tudjman, etc., trying to create a domestic capitalist class and ownership, etc. In most cases, that was by and large a failure. The only place where they could do that was Slovenia, which I think, in spite of its current troubles, I think the best trajectory for any country is Slovenia, which for me is a Western European developed country in spite of its troubles. But the rest of the region basically gave that up and chose what I call the Hungarian way, because the Hungarians never even tried to have a domestic capitalist economy. They opted for FDI-based privatization straight away, and after 1997, pretty much everybody in the region copied the Hungarian model. So what are we left with this foreign direct investment-based model? Now, GDP is catching up, and everybody mentions GDP all the time, and there's strong GDP convergence. Deputy Prime Minister was talking about that yesterday, but it's generally heralded, and especially in the business press, as a kind of indicator that, you know, these countries are converging with the West. Hallelujah, everything is fine. But if you look at the underlying factors which everyday people are interested in, GDP is not a very good indicator of measuring that. A much better indicator is, for instance, the employment level. People want jobs. A much better indicator is the convergence of wages. Average wages, spread of wages, etc. People want a salary comparable to Western Europe. Now, if you look at for the business side, a much better indicator is productivity, where the productivity is converging. Now, the unfortunate news is that if you check the data in Eurostat, and if you look at the long-term trends in all of these, there's actually divergence rather than convergence. No Central Eastern European country has managed to catch up with Western levels of employment. All of our employment levels are still, there's some countries like, for instance, Estonia, which are kind of getting close to it. But for the region as a whole, our levels of employment are way below the northwestern European levels of employment. If you check out wages, you will find that the average wages in this part of the world are actually diverging. In the single case where it's converging is Slovakia. That's the only place where you can show a slow convergence with Western Europe. In every other case, you can see a stagnation or a divergence of wages. The average consumption level of a Central and Eastern European today is equivalent to the lowest 10th or the lowest 20th or the first 10th or the second 10th of Western European wage level. So on purchasing power parity, an average Eastern European consumes at a level which is comparable to the lowest 10% or the lowest 20% of Western European 25 years down the line. And there is divergence. Now, especially important for the business side is productivity. And you mentioned how wonderfully well-trained people are here and how we have a high productivity. Well, the sad news is that the productivity per hour, per employee in Central and Eastern Europe is actually diverging from southwestern Europe. So what I did was, we don't have charts here, I'm used to sort of projecting data on a slide, but if you don't believe me, I can send the data to anyone. What I did was, I did an average of northwestern European countries, their levels of productivity, and I looked at the difference for individual Central Eastern European countries in terms of productivity differential vis-a-vis northwestern Europe. There wasn't a single country where the divergence was a convergence. It was a divergence in every single case. In the case of Poland, in spite of the huge success in the last couple of years, there was about a 35 euro difference in 2000 and a 37 euro difference in terms of productivity per hour in 2012, which is the last year for which Eurostat data is available. So our productivity is diverging. That explains why our wages are diverging. We haven't moved on to this high value added second level. So the first level we did, there was no question that the first level was a successful level. That's simply moving away from the non-sustainable Soviet-type economy to another type of an economy. But we're stuck with a low-end, low productivity, low wage peripheral role of mainly the German economy in Europe. And the second level would be exactly what the Deputy Prime Minister was talking about yesterday, moving on to a high value-added, high productivity system. Now, how do you do that? It's not such a simple thing to do. She mentioned yesterday, and here I disagree with Matthias vehemently, you bring good news about our research and development, for instance, and you say our research and development is converging in terms of GDP per capita. Yes, but you shouldn't forget that back in the 1980s, we already had research and development, which is comparable to Western Europe. We had 100%. In some cases, Czech Republic, much higher research and development than Western European countries. So from that, we dropped to levels where, for instance, in the case of Slovakia, we ended up with 0.3% of GDP being spent on productivity. So you talk about the success. I mean, I come from a country, Hungary, which was heralded as a success story in the 1990s. Then 10 years later, it was Slovakia, which was heralded as a successful Tatra Tiger economy. In the last couple of years, it was Poland. There's always a favorite, which is, you know, talked about as the success story. But if you look at the actual, for instance, research and development content, when Slovakia was the Tatra Tiger, they used to have 0.3% research and development, whereas, for instance, Japan had 3.5% on a much higher GDP basis. So this is an indicator that these are not knowledge-based economies. These are low-end economies putting together, you know, symbolically speaking, cars on a conveyor belt, shifting them back to Western Europe where they're being sold. And you need to move on from that. Well, how do you move on from that? Two things, and then I finish. One of them is you need to invest in education. You have to have a really, not just in words, a well-trained workforce, because you are well-trained, you know, compared to third world countries if your workforce can, you know, read and write and just generally put things together, but you need a really well-trained workforce to compete with Western Europe. We're not competing with Moldova, we're not competing with the Ukraine, we'll compete with China. We are competing with Western Europe in the European Union. And for that you need to invest in education. The only one country where I did see that investment was Estonia. Estonia stands out as the country which has concentrated, and they're looking better for it as well. The second thing is, and I offer this for your kind of, you know, intellectual consumption for the longer run. I don't know, this is not a simple thing, but this is something that you might contemplate over for the longer run. But think about the following. There is a 12 euro minimum wage in much of Western Europe. If you look at Western European countries where they officially have a minimum wage, it's about 12 euros. In some countries they don't have an official minimum wage, but they have an industrial wage floor agreed on by the trade unions and the employers associations, which is pretty similar, plays a similar role. So in much of Western Europe you can say there is this 12 euro barrier. In much of Central and Eastern Europe, I was looking at all the Visegrad countries, the minimum wage is about 2 euros per hour. I think this is official exchange rates. But the problem is, if I am a multinational firm, if I'm making locational decisions, PPP doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is the absolute number. So what choice do I make about moving my production? If I have any production phase in my production chain, which is lower than 12 euros, by definition, by mathematical logic, I have to move all of that to Central and Eastern Europe. I cannot move that to Western Europe. There is no way, because it's not feasible. I have to pay at least 12 euros to my employees. It's not feasible to locate these in Western Europe. So I have to move that to Central and Eastern Europe. Simply the existence of a 12 euro minimum wage in Western Europe divides low-end and high-end jobs between Western and Central and Eastern Europe. That in itself is just something I offer for longer-term contemplation. I think is a significant factor in why we are still a low-value-added, low-end. So even if we did our best, even if we invested in education like Estonia, etc., etc., if that barrier exists, it's going to keep on dividing low-end jobs and high-end jobs within Europe. So that is why I think we are not there yet, and we have a second step which we need to take.
So the question will be, should we raise our minimum wage, or should they lower their minimum wage, or should we meet in the middle?
I'm obviously not advocating moving the minimum wage straight from the 2 euros to the 12 euros. Obviously, that would be euthanasia. But
okay. Before moving on to Sebastian, I think Professor Fiedor has a quick polemic to what Zoltán was saying.
Yes,
A minute, maybe.
Sorry?
A minute. Can you?
Minute or minute? First of all, I entirely disagree with you with the way you are approaching, or you are comparing the Western, let's say, EU 15 and new EU members, because this is in fact that division. Generally, point two, I don't think that our countries are very much homogeneous. And this coefficient, this measure, FDI's share in investment, differs very much across the region. In Poland, this is much less than 1/3, for example. And I think, I don't have strict statistical figures just now available, but I think that we do differ very much from also using this coefficient. Plus, the countries in the region also differ very much in the scope of the, let's say, the small and medium-sized enterprises sector. For example, in our country, this sector contributes more than 2/3 to our GDP. So, and therefore also I don't agree that we are very much dependent only on FDIs. It's not to say that we are not dependent in general, to some extent, of course, and in some sectors. And point three is that there are some divergences between us and the Western and the EU 15 countries, of course, but there are also some areas for which we can say of some convergences. We don't have enough time to go into details of that, general.
Okay, thank you. Zoltán, you're going to have a chance to answer. Probably you might want to give Sebastian a chance to tell us, where do we go from here? Look at the risks, look at the positive aspects of what's happening today, and how will our economies look in a couple of years?
Okay, thank you very much. And it looks like I'm sitting between Professor Fiedor, a good cup, and Zoltán Pogátsa, bad cup. And I have good chances to become a wrong cup in this team, because I should talk about future, about what will influence our economies, and under what impacts they have chances to grow, and what are risks. And to leave actually more space for discussion, I will try first identify some hopes. So first of all, I think this could be a long-expected recovery in the Eurozone, something that will help us to survive in the next couple of years. Because our economies are, as you also mentioned, and in literature it is also called dependent market economies. Yeah? So to say that briefly, maybe even a little bit brutally. So this high export dependency is very strong. So we should actually keep our fingers crossed for Mario Draghi, even if it means that both Professor Fiedor and Zoltán Pogátsa will have to buy new textbooks in macroeconomics, probably for the students, if Mario Draghi will be successful. The second point is the global economy. And this is a very interesting and so far a little bit speculative area. Because, for example, in Poland we believe that we are very much dependent on demand in the German economy. So if they grow, we should grow as well. 30% of the Polish export goes to Germany. But this is maybe a risky hypothesis, but maybe it is so that if a Chinese demand grows, then the German production grows for exports, and they buy sub-products from Poland and other Central European countries. So it makes us more dependent on Asian markets than we think. And we should also observe what is going on there. This doesn't change the problem that we are in the chains of production of multinationals, and we rather do not produce many fixed products which can end up autonomously on these markets. This might be a problem. And maybe let me refer also to Ukraine, because this is the main topic of our conference, as a source of growth. In May, I spent 2 weeks traveling in central Ukraine, and of course I was suffering from so-called Ukrainian chicken game driving my car, because it means that everybody wants to drive the car in the middle of the road, because both sides of the road are simply destroyed. It is, of course, something very negative, but think about how quickly the country could grow if they start investment. And this will be also a chance for Eastern European economies to be attached to this growth. Ukraine has potentially a very dynamic and large market because, you know, just demographically, it's a bigger economy than Poland. However, there is also a slight risk in that, because, for example, many sectors in Poland are quite well developed, but based on assembly plants. This is not very sophisticated production. And if Ukraine reforms its economy, I do afraid that many of these multinationals which have these investments in Poland will simply go to Ukraine. And this will put our economies under pressure to really start with innovations. And the third positive aspect, and this might be a little bit surprising for you, consumption. You know, there is a Gini coefficient showing income gap in societies, and in Western Europe in the last 7 years, so the time between 2005 and 12, the Gini coefficient got higher, and in Central Europe it got lower. Yeah. So in our region it became lower. It means that, well, there is a chance, if the progress will continue, that we will create a base for a stable consumption, even with relatively low incomes. And now quickly to risk and maybe some reasons to complaints. And let me start with also not that obvious thing, the so-called second machine age. There is now a huge debate starting about robots, about new technologies, 3D printers in production. And for example, in Germany, there is a huge fear that this will destroy the German Mittelstand, so small and middle enterprises basing on sophisticated industrial production. Because you don't need any more sophisticated process of production, you can print that. And I'm afraid that this will destroy many jobs, not only in Western Europe, but particularly in Eastern Europe. Not only in industry, but also in services. Look, for example, at the application Uber from the United States, which is now applied in more and more European cities. You don't need taxi drivers anymore, actually. Everybody is a taxi driver. Yeah? So we will probably face a problem how to define job, what is job, and how to produce low-cost or free public services under that circumstances. This will be a huge challenge, and to be honest, I don't see typical economic GDP growth behind this process. The next point, demography. And here very quickly, 2030, Poland will be among the 10th oldest societies, I don't know, in Europe or in the world, probably in the world. But you know, nobody will deny that our societies face a huge demographic challenge, and the situation is even more difficult because our societies are not so much open to immigration. We don't have actually too much experience in immigration policy and how to design these processes, although we probably don't have any other choice than to start this new openness. And the last issue, but not the least, security. Security. Yesterday, Foreign Minister Sikorski said that Ukraine is on the crossroads, and it can go towards a typical similar solution like Poland, but it can also move towards a Syrian situation. This would be a dramatic situation for all Central European economies, because costs of access to capital would rise, and of course investors would start thinking twice before investing in the regions. And I wouldn't underestimate this issue. We've been hoping to become a kind of boring, wealthy, a little bit forgotten region in the world, yeah, well developed, but unfortunately there are risks that might change that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. I'd like to open the floor. I'd like to ask for your questions. I see a question there, and maybe somebody from the business, because I think we have a very theoretical discussion. Maybe somebody, a representative of 3M.
Hi, Christopher Hartwell, Case Research and Kosminski University. I don't know if I'm going to take it down from the realm of the theoretical, given my credentials, but I think one thing that we've overlooked on this panel, and I want to introduce it, is the role of the financial sector. Central and Eastern Europe, obviously, very dependent on not only FDI, but on cross-border flows from Western Europe. Domestic lending, both here, in Europe, in the United States, direct contributor to the hiccups we've seen in convergence, in the hiccups we've seen in growth paths in the region over the past 5 years. The Vienna Initiative obviously did some great work in kind of keeping the money flowing, but in terms of financial vulnerability, it still exists in the region. How do you factor that into some of the areas we're talking about, whether it's institutional change, whether it's convergence, whether it's labor markets? How do the financial vulnerabilities still present in the region, in your viewpoint, really affect the growth path going forward?
Do we have any other questions at this point? Yes, we do.
I'm Mary Drzewski. I'm a journalist working in London. I was very interested in what Zoltán Pogátsa said, because it chimes very well with the findings of the annual report of the EBRD in London this year, which found, to its surprise, that the economies of what we patronizingly call New Europe had, after a growth spurt, had started to, that the gap between Western Europe and Eastern Europe was starting to grow, that the expected convergence wasn't happening. Now, I've heard an academic economist in the UK describe this as a possible new form of colonialism, that the new Europeans are, in a way, they've become dependent economically on the more advanced Western economies, which is going to make it much more difficult for the gap to narrow. And I wondered whether this cast doubt on the model you call the FDI model. Thank you.
Okay, I think we'll stop with the questions right there, but I'd like to add a question to that. No, sorry, we have another question.
Maciej Olek-Szczetowski, BAE Systems. I have more of a comment than a question to the FDI model. One of the explanations, I think, for the low levels of innovation in these economies is, in fact, the FDI model, because it so happens that large corporations are dominant in innovative investment worldwide. And these large corporations tend to do the R&D at home, near their main centers. They don't do it in peripheral areas, in vulnerable areas which may be subject to further migration eastwards, be it to the Ukraine or be it wherever it becomes more cheaper to produce. So I think one of the explanations for the vulnerability that we do have resulting from the FDI model is that they do the R&D at home, and that explains why it doesn't happen here. If you look at Poland, look at the 50 largest or the 70 largest corporations, 50 are owned, absolutely controlled, even though some of them may be quoted on the Warsaw stock market, are controlled by foreigners, by Westerners. The others are Polish state corporations of the railway kind, of the post office kind, and they're not, with respect, famous for R&D, and they're not necessarily in innovative sectors either. So that explains, I think, some of the difficulties. And there's another difficulty which we're not aware of. Dividends out and repayment of debt, intercompany debt, which is high anyway, in this realm, in this area, are now beginning to outweigh inflows. It's more or less 10 billion euros being paid in dividends back home out of Poland every year by these foreign investors. And on a good year, the inflows are about 10 billion. In an excellent year, they're say 15. So already in a foreign exchange sense, in a flow of capital sense, and that was mentioned, this model is showing its strategic weaknesses for us. These are statements I have. I don't have answers to the problem, and if there are any further answers than those that have been presented by our Hungarian colleague, then I'd love to hear them.
Okay, thank you very much. So I would have a question to you that maybe sums this up, because I think we're coming to a certain conclusion, and we're talking about this FDI model. Is this FDI model also, if you could answer those questions, but factor this in, is this good news, is this bad news, and should it be exported to other countries, and for example to Ukraine? And let's say in a very optimistic scenario, in a year's time, when the situation stabilizes in Ukraine, is the model, is the road that we went down with all these problems that we've been discussing, is this something that Ukraine should take as a whole, or should it look for something else, a different model? Who goes first? Maybe we'll go in the opposite direction. We'll start with Sebastian.
Okay, so answering quickly your question. Of course, the FDI dependency model is not acceptable under all aspects and circumstances. However, if you extend a little bit the definition of Central and Eastern Europe and include, of course, Belarus, Ukraine, and Russia into that, then you have more models available. And if you look at the Eastern European models, not basing on FDIs, you have oligarchic model, which are much more difficult to be changed, and of course they are not very comfortable for democratic societies, and consequences of that we can observe now. FDIs, if they are spread in the whole economy, so they are not concentrated too much in separated sectors, they have definitely a positive impact. They have changed the economies, and they contributed to more equal distribution of power in the Central European states. So having a choice between what happened in Belarus or Ukraine or Russia and the FDI dependency model, I would definitely again choose this FDI model.
Right. Going back to the question of the lady, the British journalist lady, I think that's an important point, that, you know, if you phrase it like this, neo-colonization, etc., to me, you know, left-wing radicals, right-wing radicals say this is neo-colonization, these, you know, evil multinationals came here and exploit us. Now, you know, what was the alternative? The alternative, a lot of countries in Central and Eastern Europe tried a domestic form of capitalism. It didn't work. Let's face it. We had a window of opportunity between 1990 and about 1997. A lot of countries tried it. They failed. Except for Slovenia, they failed. We didn't have the knowledge after 40, 50 years of communism. No matter how much, you know, Václav Klaus thought that you can cut time and you can go back to 1944, and, you know, the Czechoslovakia was the 6th richest country in the world, and, you know, as if communism didn't exist. No, it did exist. knowledge deteriorated, people didn't have a first-hand experience of capitalism, we couldn't do it. Let's face it, we didn't have an autarkic form of or like a domestic form of capitalism. Second best option, let's let FDI in. This is the second best option, and I agree it's a better form than an oligarchic form of, you know, a kind of Russian-style form of capitalism. But it's not a good enough form, because it's better than what you have, you know, posted as the alternative, but it is not a good enough form because it's not leading to convergence. And the reason why I'm saying it is that I think in all of this is why I mentioned Hungary, Slovakia, and Poland. In all three places, there was this boom. You have it now here. People feel very good about themselves. There's a lot of money to consume. I saw this in Greece a couple of years ago as well. When this thing happens, people are so optimistic, they think this is going to go on forever. And then what tends to happen, suddenly there's this kind of evening out of this growth, and suddenly you're disappointed. And I think this is a rebound effect, a restructuring effect. What happened was some economies collapsed, there was a lack of investment, lack of infrastructure, etc., etc. Then you have a surge when you invest, when, you know, for instance, Poland with its anti-cyclical Keynesian policies, you know, from debt, you basically invest in your construction sector, in your transport. Very good thing. I completely agree. This is the thing to do. But it is increasing your debt. It is investment from debt. It will have to come to an end. Will Poland be left with a domestically owned, high value-added economy? I doubt it. The figures don't show that. If you look at productivity, you are diverging in terms of productivity. So I have all the best wishes for the Polish domestic economy, the small and middle-sized enterprises. I sincerely hope that they will do very well. They will increase their productivity, they will export, etc. I just don't see that in the figures yet. If you look at the figures, your productivity has not converged, it has diverged. So the problem is that you have these, I'm not worried about the financial sector question, I'm not worried about the financial sector because the large multinationals don't finance their activities from the Central Eastern European region. They actually finance from the mother company. So you're really only worried about the domestic sector. And at the moment, I think the financial context for these middle-sized sectors is not so bad. One last sentence, what is the non-sustainability of this model? I think the non-sustainability of this model that however low your Gini coefficient might be, and obviously we have lower Gini coefficients than Western Europe because everybody is badly paid. If you have an economy where everybody has low pay except for the highest 10 or 20%, then obviously you have a much lower Gini coefficient just for statistical reasons. But the fact is, if you look at the wage share of GDP in Poland, it's 46%. If you look at the wage share of GDP in Northwestern Europe, it's about 65 to 70%, depending on which country you are. So a much lower share of wages from GDP actually goes to wages, and the wages are not converging. And your employment level is still very far away from Western European level. So I think there might be a boom for the moment, but I don't think this model is sustainable unless we switch over to a high value-added model.
Right, fingers crossed. Professor Fiedor.
But there is, of course, a question how to switch to the high value-added model. It's easy to say, but not easy to do. It's just wishful thinking, but more or less. I don't know. But two more general remarks or comments. First, about the share of wage in GDP. This is normal for less developed countries to have lower shares of wages and salaries in GDP. This is a universal manifestation or process. If you look back into the history, if you are comparing some countries, this is quite universal. The lower the GDP, the lower the share of wages and salaries in GDP. So we can expect this share to grow, having in the future a bigger GDP per capita, which is a quite natural process for many reasons. But by the way, the share of wages and salaries in GDP in many countries in Western Europe is declining over the last decade, including the US as well. Is also declining. comment one. And comment two is about the FDIs and the directions of flows of FDIs between countries. Let me look at this in a more general way. So, because if we exclude, let's say, purely financial FDIs in the world, I mean fusions and takeovers, things like that. So two-thirds or more even, up to 80% of FDIs flows, excluding financial flows, are among highly developed countries. This is the so-called theory of convergence clubs, or of club, which simply says that due to some positive spillovers related to science, technology, education, and so on, what may be overcome? The tendency to diminish marginal returns on capital can be overcome owing to those positive spillovers. So the only way to attract more FDIs into, using your language, high value added sectors is to become more and more productive, is to invest more money in, I agree, in the R&D sector, in science and education, and also looking for some niches, because it's not, we can divide all the whole world into two classes. This is, let's say, technology frontier countries and peripheral countries. And we are still in the group of peripheral countries. But nevertheless, we have to look at some niches to become more or less belonging to technology frontier countries. And so if in some future we will be more and more advanced in terms of R&D, productivity, and so on, then we can expect more FDIs flowing to our high value-added sectors. So this is interdependent, very much.
Okay, Matthias, I think we don't have much time, so you'll have to sum up instead of me so that I don't eat up your time. So maybe you can just answer the simple question: is this an exportable model? Is what we've been talking about, would you wish this to somebody else, or would you change it?
Thank you. A hard task, but actually, perhaps first of all, I could point out some ideas I got in mind when we debated here. First of all, FDI. I would say FDI is not a model, but FDI is a macroeconomic indicator you can measure, but it's not, from my point of view, a spirit of economic policy, but it's the result of good economic policy framework the state can give, and then your economy will develop in the one or in the other direction. Second point, Zoltán, you said people want jobs. I mean, FDI creates jobs, and even if it's low end, it creates jobs. And it creates low income, but it creates starting a middle class, and a middle class requires social and political stability, and this will on the next step give new options for more and better and advanced FDI and more capacities. So I mean, actually there is no alternative in my point of view to have even low-end FDI. The crucial point is the second stage you meant, the second phase. There are people in Germany as well who thought about the second phase of the social market economy after Ludwig Erhard and these guys. We didn't even finish that as well, and we are as well in Germany still a transition country. And if you compare Western German economy to Eastern German economy, you have the same debates as you have here. Lower productivity in labor per hour, and lower wages and lower levels of R&D, and the Eastern Germany thinking that they are just the plants of Western Germany, big companies which produce there. I mean, actually, this is somehow normal for transition.
Now in the main auditorium.
We will do.
Program is about to begin.
Sorry for that.
Szanowni Państwo, zapraszamy do sali audytoryjnej. Wkrótce rozpoczną się obrady.
The point is now how to create an innovation model, which we can set down, that actually we can make more high-end or higher-end production out of these routes and these bases, I would say, are still making me optimistic. And perhaps as German, saying here to Poland and the region, perhaps you shouldn't be too strict with yourselves in a way. Because when we have a look at the last decade, what did we see? The most terrible crisis in the world economy in the last 60 years. And for that sake, we are still, from my point of view, in a situation where we can have the impression that it is manageable, even with Mario Draghi's help or not, but it is manageable and it does not cost these highly political costs, for instance. So, I mean, this is as well something like an educated civil society which is based on a market economy which is workable. So, perhaps my point of view would be to say, how to strive a new innovation model upon these routes that are here traced in the region as well, and then we can create with this resolving this Euro crisis and as well politically this Ukraine crisis, we can resolve a new spirit in showing up that actually this either old or new or Europe, we have to bring something on the table that can resolve deep crisis, and this is something, a message as well to the world from my point of view.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we're going to be gathering your ideas, so please send in ideas how to create this innovation model, and next year I think we're going to pick it up from there.
Can I say one thing? It seems to me that much criticisms or critical appraisal of the whole transformation process in our countries has to some extent an utopian nature, because it is just based on the assumption that it was possible to make much more, comparing in particular to EU 15 during 25 years, which is a very short time period, just nothing. Consider only the innovation systems. It took decades in many countries to have an efficient innovation systems. And 25 years, it's just maybe not close to nothing, but not so much away from this.
25 years after the Second World War, Germany, of total annihilation of Germany in the Second World War, Germany was in the Wirtschaftswunder period. After, it was already, exactly, it was after the Wirtschaftswunder.
The most interesting
But prior to the war, Germany was a mature market economy.